call this meeting to order of the Johnson City City Commission for Tuesday, November the 15th. We're meeting at 6 p.m. in the Commission chambers here at the Municipal and Safety Building. And with the meeting called to order, I'll invite Pastor Thomas Cooke to come and bring our invocation. If you'll all please stand.
Let's pray. Father, we just come to you tonight. We thank you, Lord. I thank you so much for all the leaders and the members of the Johnson City Commission in this room tonight, Lord. And we just want to give you this meeting, God. We pray for your wisdom and your guidance and your strength, Lord. We pray that you bless this city and everyone who lives here, God. We just thank you for the opportunity to come together and have meetings like this to make decisions, Lord, for the people of this city, God. And so we know in Proverbs it says that when the righteous rule, the people rejoice, God. And so I'm so thankful that we have such great men and women leading this city, God. I pray for wisdom over every single decision that's going to be made tonight, God, that your Holy Spirit will lead us and guide us, God, that you'll make this place and this land fruitful, Lord, and abundant, Lord. And we just thank you so much for allowing us all to be here tonight, God. Again, we submit this meeting to you. We pray that you lead us, that you guide us, and I pray that you bless everyone in this room and everyone watching. And we thank you so much. And we ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
If you'll turn and face the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Commissioner Brock, I believe you have a guest.
Well, Mayor, Commissioners, Chief Turner let me know today that they had found a rather large bird running around the city. They're either going to have to lock him up or we could pardon him for Thanksgiving. And so I think the police have brought him in for that pardon. And Mayor, that's up to you.
This is why I run. Okay, what do you have to say for yourself there, Tom? Did we decide his name?
Trotter.
Trotter, I'm sorry. You're throwing yourself at our mercy. Is there any objection to pardoning the turkey?
No, none.
All right.
All right, well.
Should we
you
take a
are-
vote?
Well, all those in favor of pardoning the turkey?
Yay.
Yay.
All
All right.
right.
Well, we wish you well, live long and prosper.
Uh-oh.
And
There we
Mayor,
go.
I think
Loose.
I think what we should do, though, if we pardon him, he has to show up at the turkey trot Thursday morning, Thanksgiving. Turkey Trotter, you've got to be there by about 7 o'clock in the morning. Can you do that? Okay. Lots of pictures to be taken with you. The 5K race, it actually starts at 8:30 on Thursday morning. You can go to jcturkeytrot.com and sign up and run with 4,000 to 5,000 of your best friends and family members who will be there, including all the commission, right?
Unless the Thursdays be confused. We're talking Thanksgiving Thursday, not the Thursday 2 days from now.
The
because we're meeting on a
24th.
Tuesday.
Yes.
unusual.
Thank you for bringing that up. All right.
Well, good luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commission, your next order of business is to consider the approval of the minutes for the regularly scheduled meeting held on Thursday, November 3rd, 2022.
Are there corrections or a motion?
Move for approval.
Second.
Vice Mayor, Commissioner Hunter, we'll call the roll.
Commissioner Brock?
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fowler?
Yes.
Mayor Wise?
Yes.
The next order of business is consideration of street closures. We have 3 of those to come before you, so we have Andy here with us. Andy, if you would cover the request for closure for the Atlantic Ale House, Cowboy's Christmas Pop-Up.
Sure. The Atlantic Ale House has requested a soft closure of McClure Street as outlined in the provided site plan from 3:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. on Friday, December 2nd for their Cowboy Christmas Handmade and Vintage Pop-Up event. The Special Events Committee has reviewed and we would recommend approval.
Other questions for staff? Where will you put all the traffic being detoured off McClure?
It's complicated, but I think Phil and his team have
They're
have
gonna
a
make it
really
work, got
good
it
plan
figured out. It's a
to
road to
handle
nowhere.
this. Yes,
All right.
absolutely.
Are there other questions? Would you like to tell us about your event?
Sure. Stephanie Penley, the coordinator over at Spark Plaza, and I have built these handmade and vintage pop-ups. We've previously been hosting them over at Spark Plaza. But it's a co-working space, first and foremost, and we think that it'd be a lot better and well-received at an ale house. We did a test pop-up last week, just inside of the ale house, but we were only able to fit about 5 vendors. And at these pop-ups we've been doing at Spark, we usually have about 10 to 15 vendors. So we kind of need more space for more vendors. The first one, we had over 100 people come through, and so it's been a really wonderful thing. I'm really passionate about creative entrepreneurship, work for Founders Forge, so that means a lot to me, and it's an awesome way to give back and showcase some of the best of Tri-Cities, in my opinion, you know, culture and music and artists, and it's just been a really wonderful experience, so.
Will you
Can you
repeat the
explain?
date?
Oh, sorry.
What would the-
December
when-
2nd.
December 2nd, so it's the
December 2nd,
Saturday,
yeah,
or
it's
Friday after
Friday.
Thanksgiving.
Yeah, it's the first Friday of every, we were trying to do it at the first Friday of every month,
Okay.
but this one's, yeah.
And can you explain what a vintage pop-up is?
Yeah, so a pop-up is basically just, you know, some sort of vendors. The vintage ones are more like vintage collectors. We have a lot of vintage, you know, clothes and different sort of items, and they're just a bunch of collectors, really. And so they're a curated group of items where they come and they're selling them and showing them off, and it's kind of awesome.
That's awesome.
It's pretty fun.
Thanks.
Yeah.
For the
Thank you.
record, could you give us your name?
Yeah, my name is Lydia Merritt.
Thank you, Lydia.
Mayor, I move for approval.
We have a motion. Is there a
Second.
second? Motion and a second. We'll call the roll if there's not objection. We'll call it.
Commissioner Brock?
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fowler?
Yes.
Mayor Wise?
Yes. Thank you.
The next
Congratulations.
order of business is another consideration of road closure for the animal shelter, trails, and Paws 5K.
Yeah, so Tammy couldn't be with us this evening, but I'll go ahead and cover this one. The Washington County Johnson City Animal Shelter requests intermittent temporary closures of Commerce Street, East King Street, West King Street, Elm Street, East Fairview Avenue, Hale Street, East Myrtle Avenue, Oak Street, Welborn Street, West Fairview Avenue, and Montgomery Street for their Tails and Paws 5K on December 9th from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. The Special Events Committee has reviewed, and we would recommend approval.
Are there questions for Andy? Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second. Call the roll.
Commissioner Brock?
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fowler?
Yes.
Mayor Wise?
Yes.
And Andy, I would ask you, are your four-legged friends welcome to this 5K?
They are welcome to the event. That would be a good question for Tammy as to whether or not they're going to open the 5K to animals or not. I would imagine if any 5K would, it would certainly be them. They are going to do an event that they're calling the Elf Walk or an Elf Chase in Founders Park, where there's going to be an elf walking around the Christmas trees, and folks can bring their dogs and walk them in the park and just get together and enjoy Candyland Christmas in conjunction with this event.
So you didn't answer the four-letter word.
Got a little
I-
tongue-tied there.
Nor should you.
I was being specifically evasive on that one.
Well played. Did we call the roll?
Yes.
We did. Okay, so I think we're up to 4-3.
We're ready to go.
Item 4.3 is a road closure request, East Holston Avenue between New and Stuart Streets.
Yeah, so Communications and Marketing Department is requesting a soft closure of East Holston Avenue between New Street and Stewart Street from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. on Sunday, December 11th, for the dedication of a National Votes for Women Trail historic marker, recognizing the home of Eliza Shout White, a civic leader and suffragist. The Special Events Committee has reviewed this request, and we would recommend approval.
Are there questions about this?
I might add to it.
I might say something too about it.
Okay, I'm gonna point you out, Dr. Fowler. During 2020, when we were celebrating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, one of the things that we found locally is that there were a group of women in the mid-teens to early 1920s who were very active in the suffrage movement. There was one such woman who led the groups here, who lived in the house way before Dr. Fowler lived in the house. And so she lived at 911 East Holston. And so we are recognizing her birthplace. And then Dr. Fowler walked the halls where she did, so maybe he wants to add some comments there as well.
It's actually 611.
611, I'm
East
sorry.
Holston. Yeah, I lived there with my
Four-letter.
5 children for 12 years and didn't know the history behind it, but they approached me about putting that in front of my house, and I said I would be happy to do that, and then we moved. So thankfully, the people who bought the house have said
Right.
yes to it also, but.
So if you got a beef with the vice mayor, do not go to 611, right? East Holston, wrong neighborhood.
Right, very good, yeah. And lastly, Mrs. White, in 1916, led a parade, a suffrage parade in Johnson City that gathered at the corner of Boone and Watauga. And they marched down Boone, turned left on Main Street to Fountain Square, and held their rally. And Mrs. White rode a horse and led the parade. We since have found her granddaughter, who also is an equestrian. And she and her family found out facts about her grandmother they didn't know. So it's been quite a beautiful story of a family that had a great deal of impact on Johnson City.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we need to call the roll still.
Motion and a second.
We need a motion. and
I'll
a
make the
second.
motion.
We have a motion and a second. If there's not objection, we'll call the roll.
Commissioner Brock?
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fowler?
Yes.
Mayor Wise?
Yes.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Andy. The next order of business is consideration of the consent agenda.
I'll start with the vice mayor. Is there anything you'd like to pull?
Just want to make a comment on 5.2.1.
5.2.1. All right.
And know somebody else has got some others. I think that's it for me.
Okay. Commissioner Brock.
I'm going to pull 5.1.3 and 5.2.1.
Okay. So you and the vice mayor can fight over that one?
No, sir.
Okay. All right, the first item pulled is 5.1.3. This is the facility encroachment easement.
I'm always leery of the word encroachment, so I thought maybe a little more explanation about it would be helpful.
Good evening, everybody. Yes, so the first item, 5.1.3, involves the railroad trestle kind of near Bright Ridge. We're going to be installing a new 16-inch water line under there in order to serve additional customers out in the ridges, Garland Farms, that side of town. It's our 1937 pressure zone. So in order to actually, even though we're crossing underneath that railroad trestle, we still need an encroachment agreement, which is just agreement between us and CSX. So legal reviewed it, and once this has been approved, then we'll work on it. It'll actually be, construction will be done by our own staff, so they'll be starting that sometime after the first of the year.
And that trestle's been there a long time.
Very
right?
long time.
Yeah.
So we had to go through the review process with CSX, so that took several months. But, so like I said, our guys will install it. You'll probably see them out there sometime after January.
Do we have to have a railroad observationist there while we're doing this?
We would have to have not a flagger. You'd have to have basically an inspector on site during that time frame.
So, yes.
This
Yes.
is one of your favorites.
Yeah, it is.
Then maybe we could put a historical marker by the railroad.
That's
I
right.
still have children that will be happy to volunteer for that
Oh, I know.
job, so.
But this will be a much shorter duration than the one at Walnut
That
Street.
might even
so
be better.
Maybe just a week or two.
All right.
Thanks. Are there other questions
Welcome.
on 5.1? Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
The next item is 5.2.1. So I guess it's probably you, so it's good
Also
that you
me.
stay there.
Yes, so this is for the bid award for Horizon Underground. So Horizon Underground used to be Mike Smith Pump Service. We've worked with them before. So this is the bid award for the Washington County Waterline Extensions Project. So I was here about a year ago. We went under contract with Ty Senior Hampton and Partners in order to start the design process. So now this is the bid award process for the 6 extensions. So it's Hartmantown Road, Grassy Valley Road, Pleasant Valley Road, Bill Bennett, Mulberry, and Wilcox Circle. So those 6 areas. So it's about 70 customers we're going to be able to serve with new waterline extensions. And so this would be a process where the funds through this are through Washington County. So this was their direct allocation from ARPA. So we will pay the bills as we go along, and then the Washington County will reimburse us.
Okay. So the city is managing the projects, doing the work, and
Yes, ma'am.
using ARPA funds as provided by the county.
And so we met with the county mayor before tonight to make sure that everything was still in process. So they'll reimburse us as we go along for both the contractor pay applications and the consulting fees.
Okay.
And these are currently residents who use well water. They don't have any.
Correct. So they're, up to this point, it hasn't been available. So these are all within the county limits, so still within the Johnson City water system, but outside the corporate limits of Johnson City.
A good collaborative project between
Yeah,
the
and-
city and the county.
And if I could, John, I hate to put you on the spot, but I think we were pleasantly surprised at the number of bids that we received on this
Yeah,
project.
So I think with the uncertainty in the bid market right now, if you look in the bid packet, we had 4 bidders, great bid results. So the low bidder was significantly under the engineering estimate, so right around $2 million. I think our engineering estimate is right around $2.9 million. So very good news there. A start date, though, is still, obviously with the world we're in now with the supply chain delays, don't know the exact date. Sometime after the first of the year, probably they'd be starting.
What's the length of the project?
It's about 16,000 feet, so 16,000 feet of water line, some PVC, but mainly ductile iron pipeline. So that'll be the big question mark with the contractor is just how long it would take them to get the materials delivered.
Thank you.
My only point about it is I count 5 bidders, and it says 4, but there are 5 names
Well,
listed
the engineering
here.
estimate probably is the last one on there.
THP.
So we had 4 bidders, and then that was the number, that was THMP, which was the
Okay.
engineering consulting firm. So
And all of them were under their
Under that number,
their estimate,
correct.
so
Yeah.
that's good.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
I don't think anything else was pulled,
Nope.
so we would be looking for a motion on the consent agenda.
Move approval.
I
Second.
have a motion and a second. We're ready, we'll call the roll.
Commissioner Brock?
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fowler?
Yes.
Mayor Wise?
Yes.
Commission, your next order of business is consideration of an ordinance to add Article 6.36, Rural Neighborhood RN, to the zoning ordinance.
Good evening.
Hey, Whitney.
We are going to talk about something that is a little bit of a change for Johnson City. And so we're going to kind of start at a high level and then go down into kind of a, they'll call it like a 4,000-foot level. So what we're looking at is changing the single-family districts, actually just adding 4 new districts. And so those would be the 4 on the screen. So it's urban, suburban, rural neighborhood, and rural residential. Why we might be going through some of these changes is we've seen an increased demand for development throughout Johnson City, and we've kind of struggled with some of our current requirements and where to put those. So the future land use map does not necessarily give a lot of direction as far as residential, of whether it needs to be single-family or multifamily. Our current R2 zoning districts can go anywhere in the city, and therefore that sometimes is hard to administer as decision makers. And we have a growth plan that's coming, but it's not here yet. So what staff got together to do was to say, how do we kind of fix a problem that we see, but not kind of inhibit something that might be coming with a growth plan update. So we felt as though kind of getting to a place where some single-family zoning districts were descriptive so that you could see this is the intent, this is where it should go. And how we came about that is we talked with the Planning Commission a lot about this transect model. And how this model works is this is kind of the top-down view, and this is what it would look like. But if you look at a city, of just all cities across the U.S., of how they slightly developed sometimes, just in general, if we're putting on a general's hat, you have an urban core, and then as the city starts to grow, there's an urban center zone, then you've got this general urban zone, then you get to this suburban, because kind of different things change and policies, and you've got this rural zone, and then this natural zone. The example that I truly love to use is if you came off of Buffalo Mountain and you were to, as the crow flies, come into Johnson City, you would hit all of those as you came into Johnson City, except for one, which is like the special purpose district, which is where all the warehouses are along Lake Cox. But that kind of follows that model. So what we were specifically looking at is anything that's in these kind of rural, suburban, and general urban zones. And that's where these new districts would apply. And I need to stress that it only applies to single family. It doesn't touch the R3s or R4s. It's really just sticking to that R1, R2C zone. So back to where we have these. Just kind of for the public hearing, we'll do a deeper dive with these because the descriptions are in your packet. But just to kind of give you an idea of what each of these would kind of, at least their intents. So your urban is going to be tight-knit streets, some pedestrian amenities. It would support a mixture of housing types. Your suburban preserves that kind of the suburban characteristics we already have in Johnson City, and would be able to enhance those a little bit. So you're going to have a denser street network than you would find in the rural area, and definitely some pedestrian amenities. When you go to like the rural residential, we're really looking for places where that we can, and we haven't really, that we can preserve natural environment. So maybe if there's a clustering style of development so that you can kind of preserve more land, or larger lots, those are kind of some things that we're thinking about there. But what we're deep diving into tonight is the rural neighborhood. And so we want to maintain a rural character. So we've encouraged some buffering along any of the collector roads or arterials. It has some traditional neighborhood features. So kind of saying that like there's an area where maybe there is a little more commercial. We have those in the county where there might be a crossroads, that kind of thing. And so that's kind of the idea and intent behind it. So where we started was with an intent statement. And this is the intent of the rural neighborhood, and I'll read it for you, is to maintain a bucolic character of its surroundings by preserving the natural landscape through quality design. It will provide visual buffers, which is an undulating berm, compatible vegetation that mimic the natural landscape. And then it also can have traditional neighborhood features. And it's intended to be used where there is a commercial node in close proximity. So within the ordinance that is in your packet, the permitted uses on the left, those are already in the R1s to R2Cs. Those are already in all of them. I've kind of organized it so there's permitted uses with conditions, so that the customary general farming is already there, group homes are already there. I've added parks and duplexes, and we can talk about those as conditions, so you'd have to meet certain things in order to do that. And then already in existence is uses permitted by special exceptions. Those are already in all of the other districts. As far as nuts and bolts, the minimum lot size is 7,500 square feet. Lot width is 65 feet. The front yard setback is 30 feet. The side yards, kind of thinking through some of those issues we've had with the 8 feet and the 7.5 feet, are 10 feet, and the rear yard is 30. The maximum lot coverage is still 30%, and the height is 35 feet. One of the things that the Planning Commission, when they were deliberating this, is they wanted more clarity around the buffer requirement. So in lieu of trying to put that in an intent statement, what we did was to put that as a buffer to actually call out some buffer requirements. We did not specify a width of buffer. I would like to keep that a little general because that may come out through some public comment through the growth plan of what the community sees as what a buffer width would be appropriate, because it can range. It can be 20 feet, it could be 100 feet, it could be 80 feet. It just depends on the community and how they want to approach that. It can be specific to a certain road type. So that might be something to put as a placeholder for now. And then as we go through that growth plan update to kind of look at that a little bit further. But it does give some flexibility if you've got features like we have great sinkholes, or we don't have flat land. So it may not make sense to have a 80-foot planted buffer that is below the road. So we want to be able to help with that. So we added some language about that. Where we are right now in the next steps is the Planning Commission has heard this because part of the impetus for this was the Keebler annexation of wanting to have a little bit more flexibility. And so they did recommend with the condition that the buffer be looked at, and that's what staff has come up with. They also assigned this zoning district to the Keebler annexation for the parts that previously were R2C. So the next would be the 3 readings and adoption, if that's the direction that the commission would like to go. And then staff will take the other 3, and we will start to come before you on a regular basis to change the rest of them. The idea is not to remove any of the R1s through R2Cs in our zoning district. Because what we don't want to do is create non-conforming instances. So all that will stay. It's just that if you wanted to rezone to something new, you need to go to one of the new districts. I think taking on a citywide rezoning effort might be a bit much at this point, but I think this is a good way to go so that we're not creating any non-conforming uses, and we're preparing for what is to come with the growth plan update. So what kind of questions do you have, and what can I bring back for you for the public hearing?
Are there questions for staff?
Just in terms of sequencing, I guess, if we're considering an annexation, we would then assign one of these, a rural neighborhood annexation, and then the zonings that would apply to that would have to meet then the requirements of the rural neighborhood.
Correct.
Okay,
You would do this action first.
okay.
I feel like Peyton has a slide with a star.
Sure she
in it.
does.
Oh, my Lord, I did have a star. Look at it.
Oh, there it is.
I
Okay.
needed to throw back to Peyton.
Thank
To
you.
put a star in there.
I was missing it. Are there other questions?
I've got a couple.
Okay.
Trying to make sure it was the right one. I was trying to read through the different ones.
Yeah, I did, in your packet, I just thought, I like the kind of, like maybe why this came about. So if any of that's ever confusing to you, let me know.
Yeah, and I like the footnotes on the lower half that you provided. I think it was 6.36.3.4. Section B, number 3. The lot must be 1.5 times the minimum
For
lot area.
duplexes.
Okay.
So this just applies to duplexes, and this is like the first little dabble into something like this. And what I was seeking to do is to basically to provide some additional kind of, one would call it inclusionary zoning, of a way to provide a different type of housing in an area that may not have it, but with very specific requirements, like being on a corner lot. The lot has to be larger, so it looks like a single-family home from either side of the street.
Okay, I understand. So minimum lot size for a duplex would be 11,000 plus
Yes.
square feet. Okay. My handwriting's apparently really bad. There's somewhere in here, I can't read the numbers. Something about sidewalks requirement. I believe is in here.
That may already exist. Let me make sure.
I was just unclear, is it meant to be broad so that the requirement can?
Oh, there's,
Did
okay.
you find it?
So,
was
yeah,
curious,
there's something I added there. So additionally, do the traditional neighborhood internal sidewalks are on all new streets are required. That's what I added, just to make sure that that was clear.
Does that
The
need to
other
be-
language already exists.
Does that need to be defined more as to on both sides of the street, minimum of one side of the street, or anything
It
like
can
that?
be. It can, both sides is what I would, because if you're doing a traditional neighborhood, you would want those on both sides of the street.
Is there also an opportunity to kind of like stream banking to sidewalk bank, to where in certain areas there may not necessarily be, it makes sense to put a sidewalk?
Yes, we do have, already in our ordinance, have a way to, especially on the, not internally, but on the outsides, you can, if you meet certain criteria, you can do a fee in lieu.
Okay. And then I think it's 6.36.9-ish. Yep.
The buffer,
So
I have to go back.
it says the city forester or designee may approve. It seemed to me like that might be something you want, I don't know, that you might want to bring to his tree committee or I forget the name of that committee.
Appearance, tree appearance.
What we did was use the language from the landscaping ordinance.
Okay.
To just be consistent with that.
And where'd the 10% for duplexes come from?
That came out of some traditional language that I've seen, so
So
the
it's-
10%, like, oh, sorry, the number? No, that was just me. You can make it whatever you want. I wanted to start very small. So I looked at it and thought, that means that only 10 can be duplexes. But if you wanted to say 25%, sure. If you wanted to say 5, that's okay too. 10% is arbitrary.
And
It's just thinking small.
3 readings, so we'll have
Yeah.
some opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions for Whitney?
And if you do have questions along the way, I think you all have my email address, and please feel free to shoot me an email.
I would like to, I think, tease out the duplex question, because I don't think duplexes are necessarily as egregious as people might imagine. And I'm familiar with a community in Lenore City where they have quite a few duplexes in there, and if you drove through, you wouldn't recognize them as duplexes. I mean, they just look like houses, but they're duplexes. And so, to your point, 10% was somewhat arbitrary. Is there some further or deliberate rationale for a different number? I don't want to be too restrictive. I'd like
It was-
houses to be
yeah.
affordable for people who want to live in them.
It was because in the R1 to R2C, nothing but single family was allowed. So just I like to take little baby steps. So that was kind of because that was the baby step I thought it through. So, but I can look to see if there's any other
Yeah, if
duplex.
anybody's done this, if
Okay.
there's, because you're talking about a percentage maximum, you still had the corner lot.
Yes.
You know, I mean, you're.
You're
in
limiting it
some
as
respects,
well.
you're going to be limited, I suppose you would incentivize a lot of intersections if the corner lot could hold a duplex, but it may be that you don't need that number if you've already
Yeah.
restricted it to corner lots.
Mhm. I'll look for some other.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Would it be possible to have a work session between now and when the 3rd reading comes up so we can actually tease some of this stuff out and discuss it instead of it being, we have 2 real days that we had to read this and look at everything, and that,
It's a lot.
it's a lot to take in
It is.
2 days, much less having worked 2 days in between that kind of thing, so.
And some
kinda like to-
significant but positive
Yeah, there's some, I like a lot of it, but I'd kind of like to discuss what might be better and before we just push through with it, so.
Sounds great.
Yeah, I don't think you'll ever get objection to a work session, so. We'd probably,
I kinda
we've
would like
got.
to not have it myself, but I kind of want to have it, so.
So the 3rd
more
reading
time.
on this would be December 15th. So we've got a month during which to do it, and it might be helpful. The next reading would be December 2nd? First? Okay.
And December 8th, we visit Chattanooga and their innovation.
Could we
lab.
do it the afternoon of the 1st? Is that too soon? We've got a
We
lot of-
already have a
Full-
work session.
With our
What's that?
retirement stuff and all.
Yeah.
We have that work session full on the
Okay.
1st. We'll look for another day
Okay.
in between in that next week.
All right, thank you. So is there a motion on first reading?
I'll move on first reading for approval.
We have a motion to approve 4729-22 on first reading. Is there a second?
I will second it to move it on, but I do want to make sure we have a work session before we have the 3rd reading.
All right. If there's not objection, we'll call the roll.
Commissioner Brock?
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fowler?
Yes.
Mayor Wise?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.
The next order of business, Commission, is consideration of ordinance number 4823-22. This is the first reading for the rezoning of number 1096, Johnson City Eye Clinic and Surgery Center at 0 Hopewell Drive. We have Amber with us. I don't know if y'all have had the opportunity to meet Amber yet.
Good evening.
Hello.
Hi,
Hey.
good evening. Is this on?
Yes.
Oh, I meant to adjust that, I'm sorry. So, yeah, this is rezone number 1096, and the associated ordinance is 4823. I always struggle with this thing. Yeah, I think so. Sorry. So the applicant would like to rezone this 18-ish acre lot from RP4 to B4, so that they can relocate the Johnson City Eye Clinic. This is a site. It's located at the end of Hopewell Drive, just south of where it intersects with MedTech Parkway. It has a side that touches the state of Franklin, but it doesn't get access from there. The access would be from Hopewell. And then the picture on the right is what the site looks like from the state of Franklin. And there's the multi-use path in front of it. This is the concept plan. It shows extension of Hopewell Drive to end in a cul-de-sac, and the remainder of Hopewell Drive would be dedicated as right-of-way to the south property line. It also shows a potential future subdivision of the lots that you see here, but the focus is, if I can make my mouse work, this building right here, the 60,000 square foot new building, which will be clinic and surgery center. The site is shown as medical, technical, and institutional, and the proposed use fits in with that perfectly. We have a number of policies in the bridge and strategic plan that support the project. Oops, I skipped over. I like to put this in here because the state of Tennessee also wants us to expand medical care. We had a neighborhood meeting on 2 occasions, and nobody came to either one of them. Staff recommends approval, and on August 9th, the Planning Commission recommended approval as well. And so this is the first reading. We will have 2 more, same schedule as the other ordinance. And then I'm here for any questions.
Are there questions for staff?
So, oh, go
No,
ahead.
no, no, go ahead.
This used to be B4 and was rezoned to RP4, correct?
It was something before.
Or maybe it was a
It was
medical?
rezoned when we were on the planning commission.
I thought I
Because I remember this was rezoned 7 years ago. Okay.
I believe it was rezoned for apartments.
Yeah,
Yeah.
live, work, and play. I remember they kept saying live, work, and play, but it was really just apartments. And I remember that presentation, a lot of live, work, and play.
You'd also mentioned a portion of the development, maybe also a subdivision in there?
To the south. in
Yeah,
the-
so in the future, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go back to the slide that showed
Yeah.
This
the,
one.
Yeah.
So it's a potential future subdivision. So this is the clinic site location. And then these are possible other building sites if they decide to do a subdivision in the future.
but you don't mean a
Not
residential
residential.
you mean a
No, no,
subdivision of
yeah, no,
commercial?
other,
Okay.
other appropriate uses for medical, technical, industrial,
Good.
or
We just talked about a
institutional.
subdivision.
Sorry, yeah.
Very good. That's good.
Are there other questions?
So, in the background, it mentioned that it kind of sounded like this concept plan does not.
This
set
is
in
a
stone.
placeholder concept plan.
Until
It's very likely that they're going to have to make changes. The reason that it was heard back in August by the Planning Commission, and you're only seeing it now, is because they continued to do site work, and their geologists actually have a backup slide. Their geologists discovered a number of very special things on the site.
I believe they're called karsts.
And a cemetery.
And a cemetery, yeah.
Yeah, so this is the building over here, the proposed building, and this is the area just off to the side. And there's a number of sinkholes. There is what their geologist referred to as a geologic wonder. And I have
Sounds broad.
pictures.
That sounds special.
Especially on your land, you're wanting
And
to
they're
build
here,
on.
they're here to talk about
Sounds
it.
expensive. Does it mean your land is worth more if you have?
A geological wonder.
It's really quite spectacular. But, so what happened was, they went in, they dug in, they noticed that there were more site constraints than they had realized, and they tried to start reworking it. There is a transfer of ownership of the property that is pending, and the transfer can't happen until the rezone is accomplished. So they asked to just move forward, and they will work out the kinks with the site plan or the concept plan and bring it back later.
And so the likelihood is that the concept plan is the maximum, like the most impactful, in that if there was to be a change, there would be a less, what's the word?
Density.
Less dense,
Intensive, right.
intense use of the property, is that right?
Yeah, the idea is to redesign it so that they can avoid the sensitive things,
Okay.
like the sinkholes
Okay.
and the geologic wonder.
That's what I wanted clarification on. Thank you.
Thank
But
you. Are there
it'll,
other- oh,
if
go
it's
ahead.
very different, it'll be back.
Because they are restricted to the site plan to some degree, so,
It has to be substantially similar.
okay. Did that answer that?
Yes.
Okay. Are there other questions?
I've moved for approval.
We have a motion to
Second.
approve and a second. If there's not objection, we'll call the roll.
Commissioner Brock?
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fowler?
Yes.
Mayor Wise?
Yes.
Item number 6.3, Commission, is ordinance number 4824-22. This is the first reading. And rezoning number 1098, a different chick farm and orchard located at 1112, excuse me, Antioch Road.
This is next to Grace?
So these applicants would like to rezone their property from low-density residential to agricultural to continue using the site for agriculture. The site is about 6.2 acres, and it currently contains a family-run farm and orchard. Oop, it didn't go. There it is. So agricultural uses are allowed in the R2 zone, but the use is considered accessory to the primary residential use. For that reason, the accessory structures, the agricultural structures are accessory structures, and they are limited as to how many square footage they can have. They currently would like to put in another greenhouse, and they received a grant to put that greenhouse up, but they can't get a building permit because they're over square footage of accessory structures. So the rezone would align the long-run use of the land with what they're doing right now. It just sets it to correct, and would allow them to expand their food growing operation. This is just an example. Our oldest aerial photo that we have is, or digitally, is 1993, and it is pretty much the same. I think back then it might have been more of a horse farm, but you can see now it is a food production farm. It's always been ag since it's been in the city.
Are there questions for staff? Is there a motion?
Well, I guess
Or-
I've got one question, sorry,
Okay.
Mayor. Is there, so when we look at agricultural, that could be, I mean, obviously their request is for, plant-based model, but at some point in time, it could be, livestock or pig farm or something like that. Is that correct?
That is true that they could keep animals, but they are still subject to the animal control code.
Okay.
And
This-
6 acres.
This property on the north side, is that Antioch Church? Baptist Church right there. Yeah.
Yeah, the churches.
And then Grace is over the hill.
Yep, there's a church on both, aren't there two churches?
Grace is at the upper end across the street up on the hill.
Mhm.
Antioch is the upper end of the property.
Yeah.
Just attached to your property.
Antioch comes on the back side. There's a house in between where the site blocks out there at the top. There's an old house there, our neighbor Mike, and then Antioch comes in and goes into the back side. Their property joins the back side of our property.
Okay. Then there's a large A1 zoned, wooded, looks like a wooded property there
There
to the
is-
west.
Let's
Is
see,
that to
do
the
I have the
west
zoning
or
map?
south?
It's kind of west.
Yeah, kind of west.
I thought I had a zoning map in here.
I just don't know if that's in the city or not, but.
There.
Yeah, all of the surrounding parcels are in the city.
Okay.
These three were actually annexed in together
Okay.
in 1989. And this one had a house on it, and I guess that's why it got assigned R2, even though it was agricultural.
So are there any other questions or a motion?
Move for approval.
We have a motion to approve. Is there-
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve on first reading. If there's not objection, we'll call the roll.
Commissioner Brock,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fowler,
Yes.
Mayor Wise.
Yes.
And one final question I do have.
Yeah.
Do we have any neighborhood meetings, or is it required in this case?
I apologize. Yes, we did have a neighborhood meeting. I didn't get that far in my slideshow. We had actually, I can just go to the slide. I was almost there. The state of Tennessee also wants agriculture. We had one neighbor come to the neighborhood meeting, and she was concerned with things that are more about city codes, and also the square footage of the accessory structures that could end up on the property.
Okay, and she got all of her questions answered on that?
She did. The accessory structure coverage, the structural coverage of the lot is exactly the same for A1 as it is for R2. It's 30%. So no more than 30% of the site could be covered in structures.
It's just proportionally how much of it has to be house and how much of it can be greenhouse.
Mhm.
And I believe our applicants, the products that you grow, you sell at the farmer's market as well, right?
We do. We sell off the farm at the farmer's market. We do some shipping, and not that it matters, but we're the only organic certified farm in Washington County, Tennessee.
Thank you very much.
Y'all sell peppers? Is that right?
That's our specialty. We do a lot of other stuff.
I think I bought some from you this summer.
So we have a motion and a second. Did we call the roll on first?
I think we did.
Did we?
Did we
Yes.
vote?
Okay.
We did.
All right. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you, thank you.
Next order of business is item 6.4, ordinance number 4825-22, first reading. It's the rezoning number 1099, extended stay hotel located at Clinchville Street.
Good evening,
Hey,
Mayor
Will.
Wise, Vice Mayor Fowler, Commissioners, Mrs. Ball. This is a request to rezone property, 3 lots on Clinchfield Street. The area to be rezoned, the request is located approximately in the middle of between Food City at the corner of State of Franklin and Sunset, which is just north off of the map here, and the major intersection at West Market and State of Franklin. So we're looking at this lot here, and you can see that defined, these 3 lots defined here on this area map. The current zoning is R4 medium-density residential. They're requesting MS1. It aligns with the future land use map. Back in the 1990s, I believe, this area here was rezoned to MS1. So it's compatible. It lines up with the future land use request. The purpose is for a proposed use. The proposed use is an extended stay hotel of 124 rooms. The lot's currently vacant. There was a neighborhood meeting held on October the 11th, which no one attended but the applicant, Philip Cox. A concept plan is required. This, and I know the next item that you're going to hear is a right-of-way abandonment, but there are 3 applications associated with this plat. One, this rezoning, 2, a subdivision plat, which would actually consolidate lots to allow for the construction of this hotel, and a partial right-of-way abandonment of Clinchfield Street. The right-of-way abandonment would come here, which would, the right-of-way, once this plat is reconsolidated, these 3 lots can be combined into this one lot. These 3 lots would be part of the parking lot with the hotel, and of course the right-of-way would be needed to be abandoned. There is a buffer requirement adjoining the R4 property here on the northern property line with one of the type 1 buffer options, which I know you've heard many times in previous meetings. There'd be 2 points of access required for fire, and water and sewer available. It meets all the requirements of the concept plan. I just wanted to highlight this because there are some, I don't want to say that there aren't. The MS1 allows for some commercial components in the MS1, motels and hotels, hospitals, labs. I don't want to say that the R4 is completely devoid of commercial requirements. You can have restaurants, art galleries or museums, provided that they were constructed before General William Sherman's march through Georgia in 1864. Which is my favorite little section of the code there. And this is a good example of infill development, which aligns with the bridge plan. Johnson City Regional Commission, Planning Commission recommended unanimously to approve the rezoning request. It's November 8th meeting.
The questions for staff?
I'm still not sure why medical services are restaurants. That doesn't really ever figure for me.
Is there a cafeteria at the hospital?
Inside the hospital building, but not a separate building, yeah. So people have to have a place to stay, but it still seems like a business to me instead of a medical service, but.
Anyone else with a question or a motion?
Move approval.
We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. If there's not objection, we'll call the roll on 482522.
Commissioner Brock?
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fowler?
Yes.
Mayor Wise?
Yes.
Commission, your next order of business is item 6.4, and as Will alluded to, this is ordinance number 4825-22. First reading, the rezoning number is we're at 6.5. Ordinance 4826-22, first reading, abandonment of a portion of the public right-of-way known as Clinchfield Street, associated with the site plan for the hotel.
To make that rezoning possible, or to make that development possible that we saw in the concept plan with the rezoning, this portion of Clinchfield, it's 40 feet wide, approximately 352 feet in length. It's about 117 yards, would need to be abandoned, so this could become the ingress and part of the parking lot for the proposed hotel. We sent out the request that we typically do for right-of-way abandonments to the various departments within the city and outside agencies. The only a couple points of issue here. There are easements required, 15-foot wide easements for maintenance of a sewer line and water line if the right-of-way is abandoned. We'll make sure that those easements are on the plat when the plat comes in. Actually, the plat's already in. We've been reviewing that subsequently with these two requests, and that can be approved administratively. And Bright Ridge and Lumen both have existing utilities in the right-of-way that would need to be abandoned, and they could simply cut those off at the power pole that's at the end of Clinchfield Street, which will remain in the public right-of-way. The Planning Commission recommended to abandon the right-of-way.
Are there questions for staff? If not, is there a motion on the abandonment?
So moved.
We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. If there's not objection, we'll call the roll.
Commissioner Brock?
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fowler?
Yes.
Mayor Wise?
Yes.
Commission, your next order of business is item 6.6, ordinance number 4827-22, first reading. It's an ordinance to rezone approximately 0.3 acres located at 213 South Boone Street from B3 district to B2 district. Peyton.
Hi, good evening, Commission. So in front of you, I have a request to rezone approximately a third of an acre from B3, so that's supporting Central Business District, to B2, Central Business District. And with this rezoning, there's actually no concept plan required, so all B2 uses would be allowed. This is a little bit unique because the B2 actually has a fewer uses allowed than the B3 does, so the applicant would actually be losing the right to some of their uses, but not actually gaining any uses. So the whole point of this rezoning and what they do kind of gain from this rezoning would be a complete drop of parking requirements. So as you can see in front of you, I have a picture of the B2, so the Central Business District zoning district downtown, and the star is where this site is. As you can see, it's right on the fringe of the B2 Central Business District, and it is adjacent to the Central Business District. So by expanding it, the applicant would be able to take advantage of the B2's lack of parking requirements. As you heard, it was about a third of an acre of a lot, and so it can be really difficult to meet those parking requirements for, say, a restaurant. I know we usually end on a vicinity map, but just to kind of go a little bit more in depth about what I was talking about, this is the site right here. And so it's right behind Wild Wing, and you're a very short walk away from Founders Park. You have available parking at the pavilion, and I've personally walked from the Founders Lot down here over to this part of town, even at Watauga. So it's very walkable within the downtown. So it's not an unreasonable request to not want to provide the parking that the B3 may require. It definitely fits in character with the central business district and the downtown. The future land use map does say that it goes commercial. It is already commercial, so that's keeping within that. And there was a neighborhood meeting. There was one person in attendance. She is a neighboring property owner, and she just had some questions about what the applicant intended to do. And staff and planning commission unanimously recommended approval.
Are there questions for staff or a motion?
Okay, this is repurposing this property. Is it like an auto repair place right now?
It's the old RC Cola bottling place. It's behind the old car dealership, isn't it?
It's a old building right now, and it doesn't even have a roof on it. It's a pretty dilapidated building.
It
The
was on-
applicant is planning on rehabbing that existing building.
I was going to say, I think it was on the Board of Dwelling Standards probably 10 years ago.
When it fell in, the roof fell in, huh?
But yeah, this is the building behind the car dealership that faces to First Presbyterian on
Right.
whatever.
It's right across from
Yeah.
the
Definitely
Right.
improvement will be made
Yeah.
there, for sure. Will there be any parking at all, just reduced, or?
There are no parking requirements for the B2.
Okay.
I'm curious how that parcel got zoned B3 and everything around its B2 to begin with.
It is,
There's some detail.
so if you'll see right here, I mean, it touches the B2 from behind. This
Right.
B3 kind of creeps up in this way. So, I mean, it's adjacent to other B3s, but also
it's not
adjacent to
in
the
any
B2.
way inconsistent with anything else that's down. I mean, this is.
Right, yeah, no, the character of this very much falls in line with the central business district.
Is there a motion?
Makes sense.
Move for approval.
We have a motion and a second. If there's not objection, we'll call the roll.
Commissioner Brock?
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fowler?
Yes.
Mayor Wise?
Yes. And before so there are specific plans already for that property subject to this rezoning?
No, sir, not necessarily. The applicant has ideas, but
Okay,
nothing set in stone.
thank you.
Thank you, Peyton. The next item for consideration by the commission is item 6.7, ordinance 4828-22. This is the first reading to consider assigning the RN Rural Neighborhood Zoning District to approximately 115-acre territory located north of Ford Creek and RP3 Planned Residential District to an approximately 20-acre territory south of Ford Creek associated with the voluntary Keebler annexation. Peyton?
Good evening, Commission. So I want to start off with just a general overview of the timeline. I know it's been a second since we've had an annexation, and the process has shifted a little bit. So on July 21st, you all approved a request to proceed for this annexation. And then on November 8th, this item was heard at the Planning Commission. Now tonight, on November 15th, you guys have two separate items on the agenda. What we are discussing right now is the first reading of the zoning assignment. After that, you guys will be able to vote on the preliminary resolution, which is associated with the actual annexation and plan of services. But the conversation on this item kind of focuses around the zoning assignment. And then on December 1st, you guys will hear the second reading of the zoning assignment. And then on December 15th, that's going to be the third and final reading and public hearing on both of those actions, so zoning assignment and the annexation and plan of services. So the zoning assignment, it is currently zoned A1 and R1 in the county. It is split zoned, and they are requesting rural neighborhood and RP3. So you can see that the majority of the property is requested rural neighborhood, and that is the new zoning district that Whitney went over with you guys earlier. And then this piece below Ford Creek would go to RP3. So the request is to do 361 lots, and that's the single family up here. And then these would be about 133 townhomes. So that's approximately 6 units an acre. Now the RP3 does allow up to 8.5 units an acre. The average lot size for these lots is 7,800 square feet, but I do want to call attention to the fact that that is the proposal that they have put in front of us. The zoning district minimum would be 7,500, so they would be allowed to go to a minimum of 7,500. But the minimum front lot width of the lots that are proposed is 65, which meets the zoning district standard or zoning district minimum. And again, just a reminder, this would come with those 10-foot side setbacks. So I do want to talk a second about the annexation request. I know that it's a little odd to have a new zoning district being requested, but when we first got this request, it came in, and the initial request was RP for the entire lot. And so we talked a little bit, and they thought about, maybe going to R2C, and just as Whitney had mentioned, we've had some issues with placing R2C in different districts of the city that just doesn't make sense, which is kind of where we got this whole idea to do a new zoning district concept, something that's a little bit more context specific. So I did want to call attention to the original request versus the current request. So when the applicant first came in, this blue box right here was the lot size. And after working with them and talking with different departments and working on the new zoning district, you can see that this green box that is shadowed is the current request. And you can see those specs compared over here. So again, that's 55 feet going to 65 feet, 5,500. They got it up to 7,800. The star is there, again, just to call attention to the fact that the minimum is still 7,500, and they would be allowed to go down to that if they wanted to. And again, brought those setbacks up, and we lost almost 100 lots off the original submission. So a little bit about the county zoning. I mentioned earlier that it was split zone, so you can see the vast majority of this piece of property is going to be A1, and it does have a little bit of R1 out on the front, kind of where the townhomes would go. So you can see up there just a couple by right uses if they wanted to develop this out in the county. And then without sewer availability, they would be limited to a half-acre lot size. So that is 21,780 square foot lots by right in the county. And that breaks down to about 270 homes. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the county rezoning options. So contingent upon getting utilities, if they were to attempt a rezoning in the county, this is just how some of the county zoning districts break down. So you could see if they did a rezoning, presumably they would go to request the county R3, which has a fairly similar breakdown to the district that they're requesting right now. It actually has a little bit smaller of a lot width and a little bit smaller setbacks. But again, you see that 7,500 square foot lot size. And I just want to, again, say that this is all county zoning districts. So if they did not annex into the city, these would be some options that they would have out in the county. The future land use map shows the back piece kind of going residential and the front piece going commercial. And so the idea here is just with Suncrest being a state route and pretty heavily traveled, you want to keep the more intense uses towards the beginning or towards the road, and the townhomes being up front are doing that.
Peyton, could you go back to that other slide, just a clarifying question? If they did stay county and they went for the R3, that would be only because we could add them to our city sewer system. Is that correct?
I don't feel super solid on the sewer questions, but yes, they would have to have a certain sewer capacity, which
Right.
could only be provided by the city.
And I would just add, my understanding is that if they had a septic, they would have to have a half acre lot.
Right,
Right.
that's what drives them to the big lots.
Right,
So
so that's,
every-
and that goes back to that by right development use that they have in the
Yeah.
county.
Every other assumption of a lower lot size would have to include city sewer.
Which we do have in that area, it's just the capacity for pump stations and things like
Yeah,
that, which
the-
we'll talk about in a minute, I'm sure.
Correct.
Yeah. Thanks.
A few photos of the property. It's a really pretty piece of land. And staff is recommending approval of the zoning assignment. And a couple notes on that. The residential is appropriate for this piece of land. Just as Whitney was saying, our future land use map and current plans don't really differentiate between where you can identify densities of residential districts, just that residential is appropriate for the area. And then the bridge plan does encourage housing opportunities. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions, and we also have the conversation on the annexation and plan of services next.
Can you go back to the the county lot sizes?
We just do that to make sure you can find the left button on your mouse.
I was gonna see if there was bouncing stars. So I did some Google math, and a half acre is almost 22,000 square feet. So none of those all would have to have city sewer.
That's right.
Sorry. Any questions?
You've got the floor.
Okay. So we approved the residential neighborhood, but if we, between first and third reading, change anything in that, does that, and if we approve this on first reading, do those tie together and the changes stay?
Yes, so when they come in, they will be subject to all regulations of the new zoning district. So
Sure.
whatever changes you guys make, this development would be subject to meeting those.
So there wouldn't have any resets on first readings or whatever based on any changes?
Right, but they would have to be tied together. So you couldn't, say, delay the new zoning district, but approve this. The new zoning district would have to be approved before this could be approved.
Because it doesn't exist until it's approved.
Right.
Can we
So-
go back to the map?
Yeah, of course.
Sorry.
Are you looking for the site plan or?
Is there any like stormwater or water retention, like drainage, like, you know, how we've got a lot of green, I call them green potholes around the city, to retain water as it flows through and whatnot? Is there any of that in this development, or is that a requirement in something like this?
I'm not sure where it's located on this plan. I will say, even if they had it shown, it's not necessarily binding, but I'm not sure where it's located on this
And
one.
I think Phil's here, but Phil, you may have to help with answering the question in a little bit more detail, but my understanding is that they would need to provide retention for the increase in impervious surface.
Yeah, it would be required. I'm just not sure exactly where it is on the plan.
And it could be on there, and by the time it actually gets built, it could be on there somewhere else.
Correct.
I mean, they just have to do it.
Correct.
Right.
And the reason why I ask is, I mean, that's a lot of green space that is now covered with, you know, I'm assuming, you know, concrete slabs and
Right.
asphalt.
Yes, if annexed, they would be subject to all city regulations,
Stormwater
so all
regulations,
stormwater
right.
requirements.
The roads would be built by the developer within the neighborhood, and then the assumption would be that they'd be built to city standards so that we could take them over, correct?
Correct.
And so we'd have staff out there inspecting and making sure that they're built to our standards and, you know, they're, you know, rolled out and made sure that there's no potholes that are going to form in a couple of years or whatever.
Correct, yes, sir.
You like my road terminology? And there's a lot of traffic out there, as we are all aware already. Was there any talk in Planning Commission about, you know, entering and exiting Bobby Hicks and what needs to be done or what will be done in the process of this if it's approved?
Absolutely. So we're in a pretty preliminary conversation about the development, and if it is annexed and it comes into the city, they'll have to go through, you know, the plating process and the subdivision phase where all of those, you know, initial plans are scrutinized to city standards. And I know that Public Works has already given several comments to the developer about turn lanes and different ingress and egress measures that'll be required and road improvements.
And a traffic study.
And, yes, and a traffic study will be required.
And Bobby Hicks is a state route, correct?
Yes.
That it comes onto, correct?
Yes.
So will it be a double layer of scrutinization, or is it one or the other?
It's going to be a very multi-jurisdictional process. It's going to take the state, the county, and the city all working together.
And so whatever I mean, obviously, I think there's going to be impact to the road system, which would mean there's an assumption that there are going to be additional requirements.
Absolutely.
And who ultimately will be responsible for those? Is it the developer?
Yes, sir.
Okay. That's all I got for now.
Yeah, I would just expand a little bit to say that the traffic impact analysis will come back with recommendations that we've talked about, and some of those may be a traffic signal, a deceleration lane, whatever that study comes back and says to mitigate the impacts of traffic, then the developer is responsible for doing that mitigation before the project is finalized. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And then I think something was brought up earlier, or maybe I read it, something with our sewer. This whole project, well, one, housing doesn't necessarily happen like a multifamily where it's, you know, 18 months and it's all done. But we've got some sort of commitment as to if this was to be done, the furthest we could go in a certain period of time. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's actually included in the plan of services. And so sewer is unable to accommodate an entire build out all at once. So similar to things that we've seen in the past and other projects that are in the city, this would have to be a phased project. So they would be responsible for only a certain number of homes at first. And then once those get built and we can accommodate those, there'd be another phase. And it would be over a 5-year process.
So with that, back to the traffic, is the impact, say that they, based on the full project, it says we need, 10 red lights or whatever. Would those all be required at that time, or would that be phased based on the build-out phasing?
I believe that that goes through the state. I'm not sure exactly on the timeline for that. I think that Public Works would know better on that answer.
Here he
coming.
comes.
He's getting up.
Along 75, in our analysis, there are a number of intersections that are very close to being warranted for signalization. If this development goes in, and once it comes in, Sid Martin Road will be the first one. We've already received requests for Sid Martin. I think that's Sid Martin. And that feeds back to the school, so that actually works well. So when you look at the master plan for the whole area, the first things you start seeing are signals, and then you'll see, because we're running at 12,000 or so vehicles a day in this particular area, and then you'll start seeing intersection improvements, and then you'll ultimately see 5-laning of 75 Suncrest. So that will be the sequence that we'll be operating under. There probably will be another signal further down towards the interstate as things develop. And then that's how you generally will look at transportation. Will the developer be required? Probably not. That will have to fall under some program, whether the state does it or whether we use STP monies or that sort of thing in order to make that improvement.
You're talking about 5-laning.
No, on the signal at Sid Martin, which we know would happen, because you're almost there today and his development puts it over the top, or if a development further back behind Westview, if that were to come online even before his, something's going to trigger a signal at that location, no question. And we'll deal with it at the time that it happens. But today, it doesn't warrant a signal.
Five-laning sounds like it's a long way off.
Those type of projects usually take about 8 years to get on the ground from the moment that you say, let's start looking at it and planning for it. Takes a while. They do have a lot of right-of-way in the area, but there's plenty of capacity on the road. There were peak times when school's in and out that it wouldn't be. It feels jammed, but for today, that's not something that is overly burdensome on us.
And the reason for traffic lights would be to further slow the progression of the need for a 5-lane, correct? I mean, if you're able to
No,
move
it's
the
actually,
traffic.
it's actually to move the traffic off of the side streets because there's a lot of delay. So when the volumes go up, there's less and less, so you have to have signals in order to get the people onto the street.
Safely.
I have a question for Peyton. So you come back up. So we're going to be voting on whether to zone this rural neighborhood here in just a minute. So can you, when we discussed rural neighborhood, we didn't really talk about requirements for green space in these larger developments like this. Can you address that? Do we have any requirements or?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the rural neighborhood, there are no green space requirements. And the reason why is because staff has been working on a separate open space ordinance that's going to be brought to the Planning Commission in December. Now, the open space ordinance is not included in the zoning districts because the open space ordinance would apply to all zoning districts. So it doesn't matter, you know, what district you come in as. The open space ordinance applies to everything. So it is a separate item that's coming before you guys. And once it gets passed, any development that comes after that would have to comply with open space requirements.
Well, sequentially, if we assign rural neighborhood to this one and that one's not in place yet, is this one grandfathered in to have none?
No, because when you're annexing this, you're not binding them to a site plan. So they would be subject to all regulations at the time that their development proposals are officially submitted.
And when I look at the density of this, it just screams out, you've got to have some green space in there, significant, and then stormwater, Phil.
Yeah, he has actually submitted plans showing stormwater. What we try to encourage is for the stormwater to become a feature. So when you're, and that's what the open space is all about. So when you're driving down the road, you just don't want to look at a bunch of houses. You really want to look at something that is aesthetically pleasing to both the residents and for the motorists driving by. So we're hoping the open space, that he pays attention to that he can use the detention facilities in a manner that it becomes an amenity. For example, Highland Park out near the Ridges, they had the detention facilities and they made lakes out of them and becomes a feature. And that's what they're trying to encourage with this open space. That's what we try to tell the developer is we want that type of development. We don't want to just take some corner piece of property and call it green space. So
And
he's hearing what I'm saying.
Yeah. So when
And they're gonna do it.
When is the open space ordinance gonna, what is the timeline for that?
That will go to the Planning Commission in December and would be, if it follows normal procedures, would be in front of y'all in the beginning of the year and follow the 3 readings.
Are there other
I
questions?
do want to say
Oh.
that the RP3 does have required open space. It wouldn't buffer along the road as the proposed RN would, but they would be required open space of 15%.
Thank you. Are there other questions?
Just curious, and this may be something more for public hearing for the developer, but, you know, like we saw with the eye clinic, they acquired a piece of property with the intentions of doing a higher impact, and now after doing soil studies or core drilling, found that they aren't possibly going to be able to do the full project. Is that something that's been considered in this project, or do we know that at this time, or?
I'm not sure how extensive they've gone and tested the property, no. But I mean, I think that there's always a possibility that as you're going along, things happen and you can't develop the way that you want to. So I think that I don't want to say it's a good thing, but this current proposal in front of you is pretty much maximizing the zoning district. And so I don't really think that there is a scenario where it gets more intense than this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One other question. Now, I recognize this is not binding here, and I don't understand what's going to be on the open space ordinance. But is there enough room in the project plan here to add green space? Or if we go ahead and approve it like this without that in there, then we just lost out?
Explain to me what you're asking, Commissioner Brock.
No. No. Since the open space is not in place now and it won't impact this development, it's very dense in there right now. So we're going to wind up in this development with really very limited green space. Is that correct?
There is a potential that it goes through and they get their plan submitted before open space gets passed, and they're able to get out of that requirement. There is also a scenario where this item gets passed, the open space ordinance gets passed, and they have to comply with it. So that non-binding site plan works both ways. It means that, we can't necessarily hold them to this, but it also means that things can change, whether that's in a, again, more intense or less intense way.
But
What we have seen, Commissioner, are plans that show detention facilities. What we're trying to encourage him to do is to convert the detention facilities to an aesthetically pleasing green space. If we can't get the open space program in place, and we've seen his plans, and we're just trying to encourage him to do that jointly, an aesthetically pleasing and to satisfy the stormwater requirements, which are 100-year detention.
Other questions? Again, this is on first reading. Is there a motion?
I'll move approval for first reading. I'll be interested to see how this progresses and get to public hearing.
Is there a second?
I will second it too, but again, the work session on the RN, and that's going to come out in the next couple of meetings, so pass it along to the second reading.
Are we ready to call the roll?
Commissioner Brock?
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fowler?
Yes.
Mayor Wise?
Yes.
Commissioner, that is the end of the public hearings. The next order of business is item 7.1 under Other, is to consider approval of the preliminary resolution calling for a public hearing on the proposed voluntary annexation of plan of services of approximately 135 acres along Suncrest Drive, also known as the Keebler annexation.
And just to clarify, in case anyone felt like they missed it, we were not in a public hearing. Those were first reading. Public hearing is coming up. That is still in the future, so you haven't missed anything. So.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Wise. So again, we're here. We are now taking off our zoning assignment hats and putting on our annexation hats. So this is a preliminary resolution that would call for the public hearing of this item, and that would be on December 15th. And again, the request is this total piece of land right here. Now, the annexation corresponds with the proposed plan of services. The plan of services is in your packet, and I'm not going to go through and read each one of those. You guys, I'm sure, fully went through that and looked at that earlier. But I do want to call note to a couple concerns that were in a breakdown analysis of the plan of services. And that is, police has mentioned staffing concerns, and those are actual present concerns. The police department is currently understaffed, and so this development would require additional officers and additional personnel, and so they're already having trouble meeting those staffing concerns. And that's not something that this development is, causing. Again, that's a present issue, but just something to be aware of is that this development would require the need for additional officers. Water and sewer, we kind of talked about this just a second ago. We got into a little bit. There would be delays in sewer availability. So sewer would not be available initially. And just like I told you, Commissioner Hunter, it would be over that 5-year phased out period. Schools, again, this is a present concern that we currently have. As you guys know, Johnson City is growing, and there is concern regarding the future capacity at Science Hill High School. And again, whether we annex or not, that is an existing concern, but adding additional residents just causes the concern to grow. And so transit, additionally, kind of like we were saying with police, there's some staffing concerns going on with transit, and so that calls out a potential delay of services in the plan of services as well to make sure that we can find drivers for the school buses. And again, just a reminder, the zoning assignment, it's currently A1. They're going to the proposed rural neighborhood and the proposed RP3 below. And just a reminder of the plan that they have in front of them. And staff is recommending approval of the preliminary plan, the plan of services, and the Planning Commission recommended approval of the plan of services by a vote of 7-2. And I'm happy to answer any further questions about the annexation or how we can serve it, or direct the questions to the appropriate department.
Was there a shared view that contributed to the 2 votes in opposition, or were there reasons as unique as 2 different people? I mean, was there a sense that they had keyed in on 1 or 2 things, or were they kind of varied in their approach?
I don't want to speak for a planning commissioner who voted against it, but I will say that most of the concerns regarding the proposal was around the development and its lack of current incorporated open space. I think was a big part of the conversation, and just the general density.
I think one of them was concerned about the infrastructure things, plus the lack of employees to cover all the things you talked about with the police, with transit, with all those kind of things too. And it doesn't look like that's getting a whole lot better in the future with more people moving here and things too. So we've got to worry about infrastructure before we get too involved with bringing in, incorporating, annexing, and we need to make sure we're prepared for it.
Absolutely, Vice Mayor.
Are there other questions for staff? Or a motion?
Move approval.
We have a motion?
This is just on the plan of services, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, second.
We have a
for now.
motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Or are we ready to call the roll?
Commissioner Brock?
I'm going to vote in favor of this. However, just would like to say that this is one request for annexation. We're going to have much more growth, and so really the impact on plan of services throughout the city and the cost as a city and city departments to do this is really going to be challenging for us. No 2 ways about it. So looking at everything kind of in totality as well as individually, I think it's going to be really important for us here, I mean, soon. And, you know, I know our growth management plan is underway and being developed, but simultaneously, all this is happening as well. So I'll vote yes.
Commissioner Hunter?
Yes, I mean, to echo Commissioner Brock, this is a big deal. It's a big project and has a lot of implications that we take very seriously, I believe. There's no question about that. So.
Vice Mayor Fowler?
I'll vote yes also, but we've got a lot of planning of our own besides the Planning Commission on future growth and things that we need to work out. So we need to start keeping on top of all of these and get together and make some really good decisions.
Mayor Wise?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commission, I think there may be some questions. I do not have a city manager's report at this time. I have heard the questions around the zoning district, as well as the annexation. The work session that we would plan, we would incorporate the questions that you've asked tonight, the questions that the Planning Commission has discussed as well. But I think we would like to incorporate both the district itself and the annexation as one work session, but distinguish between the two. But it's really hard not to consider them together, given that we're running these at the same time. Does that make sense to you all?
Yes.
I would like to make one other comment, Ms. Ball. If we have one of the developers sitting out here, we need housing. There's just no 2 ways about it. We know what's going on in our community, but in many, many communities across the board. And so we just want to get some of the best affordable housing possible for our citizens here and do it in a way that's very compatible with kind of a rural area where we live, and get it right and work together on this. So just want you to know this is not against development whatsoever. Something we sorely need to do.
Yeah, and I've asked our city attorney, Sunny Sandos, to come up. In hearing the questions and concerns and trying to think through the timing of being very deliberate and answering these. And I'm sorry, Sunny, to put you on the spot, but I'm trying to think through, if there is a request on the part of staff to be able to continue this, not to the next meeting, but to the next one, is there any action that has to happen if we can work through moving this second reading to December 15th?
You table the vote.
Okay,
We also have put in a public hearing notice in the paper.
okay.
So that would be something we want to consider. It's not gone yet, but like, it can do that.
Well, but if you did second reading on December 15th, your public hearing would still happen on the 15th. Is that what you're
We'd
saying?
like the staff to come up to the microphone.
talking about moving the?
Sorry, Wendy.
Are you guys talking about moving the annexation?
We're talking about moving all action on this potentially. I just want to make sure that we clearly are able to address all the issues. And I'm a little concerned about moving with the second reading on the first, because I really want to hopefully get all the questions asked before it gets to second reading and not wait till the third reading. So in looking through the calendar and trying to find a work session date, I'm thinking that the work session date may be later. And so I'm trying to figure out what action, if any, we need to take to make sure that we do what we need to do here tonight, if that's an option and the commission would consider.
I will just say that the preliminary resolution that you all just voted on does call for a public hearing on the 15th. And the annexation process, and I'm sure Ms. Sandos can explain more, but it has very specific requirements about how that is notified. So if that is an action, we would have to amend, I guess, the preliminary resolution to change that public hearing date.
Could we just pull it forward to the second reading, or? Because it's third reading, right?
The public hearing is third reading, yes.
Yeah, could we not pull it forward? Are you talking about the 15th being second reading?
Yes.
And
then
just
the
pull public
Third reading
hearing?
would be the first meeting in January.
We would have to amend the previous.
So
vote, right?
the public hearing goes along with the final resolution, and so on the night of the public hearing, you're voting on the final resolution, which is the finalization of the
So
annexation.
public hearing and third reading need to be at the same time.
Is that by?
Yes.
And that is why.
For the annexation. So, and I've actually thought a lot about this, and one thing that you could kind of do to get around that, when we discussed this process, we had actually initially moved the public hearing on the zoning assignment to the third reading, so that if you were a member of the public and you wanted to come out and speak, it would be on one night. But potentially, we could go back to the way our rezonings work and have the public hearing of the zoning assignment on the second reading. But those notices have already gone out in the paper for this December 1st meeting.
And is it codified that you have to have it on the third reading? Is that just our practice?
For the annexation and plan of services, yes, the final resolution has to be on the same night. It's not necessarily a third reading, it's just whenever you consider the final resolution.
And that's by law?
Yes, that's by state statute.
So, but at that time, you have public hearing, could you table a vote or push the vote to another date?
You can
at
always
point
do
in
that.
time?
Is that correct, Ms. Sandos?
If there were.
I would need to confirm that based on the way the statutes read. There are very specific state laws with regarding the annexations and the timelines, so we would have to confirm that.
Okay, we will look into it. I just want the commission to know that we're going to be very deliberate in reviewing this in conjunction with the zoning district as well as the open space ordinance that's coming to you all the first of the year. And we can work through those details.
Could we check, I don't know why it's on third reading because it's like way toward the end, but could we do second reading and just leave it open through third reading?
I think that would be a decision that you could make at the next meeting, so I think that would be, we would continue though to have the second reading on the 1st of December. And then you
Right,
could make
we-
the decision at that point to table it.
Is that Ms. Sandos' opinion?
Commissioner Brock, are you asking about the public hearing? If you opened it on second hearing and then kept it open?
Mhm.
I believe that it has to be
We've done that
opened
before.
with
On
the
the third.
final.
Could you just open a public hearing and say specifically, we're just interested in this topic on second reading?
We'll need to take that under advisement.
Okay.
I believe that it has to be opened on the third, on whatever the final. Not every board commission has 3 readings. We have it by our charter that we have 3 readings, so our third is always our final.
So I think one of the questions was, if we had the second reading on December 1st, could we put the third reading off until January and just vote on that at our next meeting?
Potentially, we would just have to come back and amend the preliminary resolution that changes the public hearing.
But we could do that at our next meeting.
Yes, but I also do want to clarify, we have already sent out all of our press notices for public hearings for the December 1st meeting. So we cannot open any public hearings on anything on December 1st for this item.
Right. But we could put that off, the third reading off, till the first meeting in January. at
Yes,
the
on
next
December,
meeting
on
if we
December
needed to.
1st, if you guys had the intention of changing that date, we could, but the problem with that is that the preliminary resolution, again, has very, very specific call-out dates, and so a lot of them are notifications of, in this instance, 15 days. And so just looking at December 1st versus December 15th, notification requirements would be required to go out on December 1st, and essentially the day before, right? So it's a tricky situation there. So and actually just kind of thinking through this, if you guys want to amend the preliminary resolution to move back the public hearing, I would actually recommend doing that right now at this meeting, if that's something that you guys feel you need to do.
I think I would vote to amend it tonight, right now, and move it to the first meeting in January.
The vote's already final. We can't make a motion to amend after.
Yeah, because
after
you've
the vote
approved it.
is
We will work through this in the
final.
next one. I guess I would want the public as well as the developer to know that we are going to move this forward very carefully, and I appreciate them working with us on this, but we want to make sure we address all the commission's concerns so that when we bring it forward. But right now, we're prepared to bring it forward in the same way that we talked about. December 1st, we will move everything forward in the same way. And at that point in time, we will be able to advise you if you wanted to consider moving it forward, how you would do that. And we'll be prepared to address that at the December 1st meeting.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, now that that's clear as mud.
I'm sorry to have complicated that.
No.
Under information, I think we do have some questions under the information.
Yes. Under the construction project reports, I had a few random questions of updates. I think the first.
I think we have staff here to address those,
Okay.
hopefully.
The first one would be the animal shelter and also Town Acres.
Mr. Trivets prepared to answer.
Oh,
that.
I'm ready.
I kept looking for you out there.
Yeah, sorry.
He's over here.
So I think the animal shelter said that the punch list should be completed by yesterday. Are we there?
Yes.
And we had final inspections for the building department, and everything was released so that the animal shelter can occupy the new facility in addition. So they are moving in. Brian is working with the contractors on their final punch list, but we are past substantial completion and also past all the final building inspections according to Brian.
And this is for the new
Spay neuter clinic.
Spay and neuter clinic.
So do we know anybody that might know when they expect to be open?
I might. You all will be receiving an invitation to do
A ribbon
a
cutting?
visit in December, so we'll be getting that date to you very soon. You're going to be very impressed.
And the breezeway at Town Acres, so items were on back order, but did they come in, or do we know yet?
We do not know that they've come in yet. The contractor checked with the vendor, the supplier, and he's not heard back yet. But he was checking with them yesterday, and he's not heard back if they came in yesterday or not.
Okay.
But they're expected anytime soon, and it is a local vendor who's very reliable and works with us on a lot of other projects. So I would, suspect as soon as they come in that they will be able to get those started.
And I don't want to hold you to it, but once they're in, on site, what's the expected installation completion?
I believe they said they wanted like 30 to 40 days to be able to complete it once they had all the material.
Okay.
I think that was on their bid request.
And then the next would be the railing, speaking of railing, around the playground in front of the library, I guess. The nature part, right?
Mr. Penzola can address that.
We've been all over them, and we were hoping to, we've been advised that most of the railing will be in by Thanksgiving.
Okay.
Of what year?
You are exactly right. I do not know which year.
Stream mitigation, if I read it correctly, was planned to be done by June 30th, or for the draft plans that were submitted. Where are we on the stream banking?
We have submitted all the paperwork. We're waiting for FEMA to respond. There was some correspondence since the town of Unicoi was involved in the flood elevations. There was some recent correspondence trying to get clarification. We were hoping to have everything resolved by the end of the year,
Okay.
but we don't know.
And then two last ones, Phil. Knob Creek Overpass, designs due January 1, so once that's done, what are the next steps, or what do we see? Do we see dirt moving, or?
What's left is, they finally got the soil boring, so that it leads to the final design of the bridge structure, and we are getting appraisals on the property owned by the railroad, so we get the air rights. Once those two things are resolved, then those final plans, the final right-of-way certifications, get handed off to the state of Tennessee. Then we're on the state of Tennessee's list of when can they get to the project.
And we're communicating with them every day. Glenberry with MTPO is emailing them, copying Phil and I on those communications so that they know we're getting very close to turning it over. But then there will be this delay that they take it from the ball in our court for that responsibility to the ball in their court, and there's always delays and procedures that they have to go through in order to do that. But we've started that notification early so that we can minimize that as much as possible.
We got to do it quick before someone at the railroad changes and they change all their opinions and
That's
things.
right.
Really?
We've had multiple opinions.
That's
I know.
right.
Get it done while this same guy's still there.
You have other questions?
One more, Oakland Mountain View widening, are you going to bid that out, or what's that process looking
We'll
like?
construct it internally. We should have the bridge plans. We have to build a new bridge next to the existing one
On Oakland, or?
on Oakland. And then we will start construction sometime in the spring with our crews.
That's it.
So while you're up here, Phil, it's not on a construction project, but I think we've all gotten a lot of calls from citizens saying there are a lot of leaves in Johnson City this year. Can you just give us an update on leaf pickup?
Well, for the general public, I've been around for 40 years, and we've never seen this happen before. Where the leaves fell early, and then it was good weather, so everybody raked. So that has an impact on our ability to get around town with the crews. So, number one, it's slow going. We're around 40% of leaves, total leaves collected. We've only covered about 65% of the town, and we generally cover the town about 3 times per season. We haven't got to portions of it. In part because, and that's the big one because that really affects productivity. But the second one is the supply chain. We are not capable of running all of the trucks. We usually run 12 routes, and it's less than that. And so supply chain's creating some issues on truck availability, and finally, the labor supply. We use AccuForce in those temp agencies. They're having a hard time filling all 22 positions or 24 positions that we need. Today, I think it was around 16 or less, so that's another problem. So what we're doing is we're going 10-hour shifts, sun up to sundown, and going to 6 days a week to try to provide the service. If people are concerned, what they can do is get on the city website. We have a map that shows where we've been and where we haven't been, and we're trying to keep them abreast. It's a nice little map to take a look at, and that should give them updated so they don't have to necessarily call us.
When you say supply chain, do you mean we don't have all of our trucks running or operative?
Yeah, I have real problems in solid waste where we're collecting. We're down to our last truck. We don't have backups. That's creating problems. So we're having to run more on weekends. We're running double shifts. That one is a supply chain issue. I cannot get the trucks back. They just will not run. And so we've told suppliers, threatened them, there's nothing they can do. On the leaf trucks, that's where we use multi-purpose trucks, and some of them are down and creating a problem with us having the available equipment on hand to provide all the services. And if it snows tonight, that's even worse.
When I looked at the GIS map at my neighborhood, it just said, "We'll see." So I just figure you'll get there when you get there.
Yours isn't the last neighborhood to get
It's
it.
second to last, based on the color coding. So I've been wondering.
And most of that equipment that he's talking about has been ordered. We've got vehicles and equipment for Public Works and all of our other departments across the city that are from the previous budget, not even including in this budget, that we still haven't arrived yet. And no matter how many phone calls we make, no matter how much we push, we're still at their mercy.
Even in the purchase of some equipment, you're talking 4 years out.
Yeah.
It's really bad. So we'll deal with it. We'll get
Well, I
it.
think it's good to let our citizens know if there's anything they can do to, help out the situation, but have a better understanding about what's happening.
Their patience would be very much appreciated.
Okay.
We're getting a lot of phone calls.
Maybe we could put out a press release or something just about update.
There have been a number, yeah, there have been a number of
She did.
media announcements. but-
Social media, yeah.
I missed it in the paper. 'cause
Are there any other items or information items? If there's not, this meeting will stand adjourned.